I was 22 in the fall of '93, living just outside Bellingham, Washington. I worked nights unloading trucks for a warehouse and spent most of my days hiking to clear my head. I wasn't really into the city scene, and the job left me wired after my shift ended around 3 a.m. So most afternoons, after I got a few hours of sleep, I'd head out to walk the trails behind Lake Whatcom or down around the old logging roads near the outskirts of Sudden Valley. I had a used '85 Honda Civic, a portable Walkman, and usually a peanut butter sandwich stuffed into my coat pocket. One of my favorite spots was a barely marked trail that curved off the main dirt road past an old chain gate. It wasn't on any map I'd seen, and it didn't look like anyone maintained it, but it was quiet and steep and had a few great lookout points if you went far enough in. That day, mid-October, it was drizzling and cold, but I went anyway. The sky was gray, the kind of gray that just hung overhead like a lid. Leaves slick underfoot, the whole forest smelling like wet bark and moss. I was maybe an hour in when I spotted something off-trail, half buried under pine needles and mud. A cassette tape. At first I didn't think much of it. People tossed all kinds of trash in the woods, though it was strange to find something that intact. No label, just an old Maxell with the little tape window darkened from moisture. I stuck it in the side pocket of my coat without thinking and headed back down before the rain really picked up. The weird thing was, I'd been down that trail maybe 20 times, and I'd never seen anything like that out there before. Back at my place, I dried the cassette off as best I could with a dish towel and let it sit by the heater while I showered. Later that night, after my shift, I dug out my old boombox from the closet. I hadn't used it in a while, but it still worked fine. I popped the tape in and hit play. At first, there was just static, soft and uneven, like a blank tape someone had recorded over. Then came a low hum. Not music, more like room tone, like someone had left the mic running in a quiet space. And then, after about 30 seconds, the sound of a person crying. It was a woman, or at least it sounded like one. Quiet sobs, drawn out and shaky. The kind of crying that doesn't sound staged, just exhausted. What made my stomach knot was that the sobbing would stop every now and then, like she was listening to something, then start up again but more panicked. No talking, no background noise, just her. The weirdest part was that it didn't sound like it had been recorded outdoors. It was too still, more like a basement or a closet. I let the whole thing run, maybe 10 minutes in total, and then it just cut off in the middle of a breath. No clicks, no rewind, just silence. I didn't sleep much that night. I couldn't stop thinking about it. How the tape got there. How long it had been sitting out in the rain. The crying didn't sound recent, but it also didn't sound old, like an archival thing. It was too clear. I thought about reporting it, but to who? It was a blank tape found in the woods. And besides, what would I even say? Hey, I found a cassette with someone upset on it? Still, something about the way her breathing changed when she stopped crying really got under my skin, like she was listening for something. A few days later, I drove back out to the area where I'd found the tape. I don't really know what I expected, maybe just to prove to myself it was nothing. But when I got there, something felt off. I looked down at the spot where I'd found the tape and saw boot prints. They weren't mine. Larger, deeper. And there were a few cigarette butts crushed into the wet ground, fresh enough that they hadn't completely soaked through. I didn't stick around long after that. That night I decided to listen to the tape again. This time I used my Walkman, headphones on, volume up. Around the 6-minute mark, after one of the longer pauses, I caught something I hadn't heard before. Real faint. Like a whisper, maybe from further back in the room, wherever it was recorded. I replayed it 3 times, and finally caught a word. Closer. Just that. No context. No follow-up. I felt sick, like I'd invited something into my house just by listening. I took the tape out and smashed it with a hammer out in the carport. A few weeks went by, and I started to feel normal again. Then one morning, I got home from a double shift and noticed something tucked into my storm door. It was another cassette. No label, just the tape itself, wrapped in wax paper. I didn't bring it inside. I don't know if someone followed me that day I went back, or if they'd known I found the first one all along. I left the tape on the porch and drove straight to stay with my brother in Spokane for a while. Nothing unusual ever happened after that, but even though I loved hiking, I could never bring myself to go alone again. I was 17 and living with my mom in a flat on the 3rd floor of an old apartment block in Berlin-Kreuzberg. It was 1993, and the city was still in that weird transition phase after the wall came down. My mom worked nights cleaning at a hospital in Mitte, so most evenings I was home by myself, doing schoolwork or watching old VHS tapes. We didn't have cable. Never did. Just a rabbit ear antenna and a stack of dubbed movies from my cousin in Hamburg. We were pretty quiet, kept to ourselves. It was a cold Wednesday in March, sometime around 6:30 p.m., when there was a knock at the door. I remember it clearly because I'd just put a frozen pizza in the oven. Through the peephole, I saw a man, probably in his late 30s, wearing a blue jacket with a patch from a German cable company on the sleeve. He had a clipboard and some kind of toolkit hanging from his shoulder. He probably noticed me looking through the peephole because he smiled and said, "Routine cable inspection. Should only take 5 minutes." But like I said, we didn't have cable. I told him that through the door. He didn't argue, just paused, then said, "That's strange. You're on my list." He held the clipboard up like that proved something. I was about to walk away when he added, "This building's been having interference issues. I just need to check the wall socket, standard check." It didn't sit right. He wasn't aggressive, but something about how calm he was made my stomach tighten. I said no again, louder, and this time he stepped back, nodded once, and walked away without another word. I waited until I heard the stairwell door close before I moved. The next morning, I mentioned it to my mom when she got home from her shift. She looked tired but still alert, and when I told her about the cable guy, her face tightened. "We don't have a contract with anyone," she said. "If the building was getting service updates, we'd have a notice from the property management." She asked if I remembered what the guy looked like, and I gave her a rough description. Dark hair, clean-shaven, kind of tall, maybe in his late 30s. She didn't recognize it, and we decided to let it go. Maybe it was just a mix-up, but that night, around the same time, close to 6:30, there was another knock at the door. I checked the peephole immediately. No one. I waited, holding my breath, listening. Then the knock came again, but this time softer, like knuckles just grazing the wood. Still no one visible. I backed away from the door and sat on the couch, heart pounding. About a minute later, I heard the distant sound of footsteps going down the stairwell. Slow, deliberate, like the person wasn't in a hurry. Later that week, I ran into Frau Eberhardt, the old woman who lived in the unit below us. She was always on her balcony smoking, so she saw a lot. I asked her if she'd seen any technicians come by lately. She frowned and said no, but then paused and added, "There was a man loitering outside on Monday, standing across the street, just looking up at the building." When I asked if she could describe him, she just shook her head. Didn't recognize him. Didn't like the way he looked, though. Stood there too long. That night, I pushed a chair in front of our door. A few days later, I was getting ready to leave for school when I heard the knock again. This time, I didn't even want to look. But I did. Through the peephole, I saw the same man from before. No uniform, no badge, just a jacket and a grim expression. He said, "I need to check the wiring." "It's important." I told him firmly that we had no cable and no appointment. He smiled, but it wasn't friendly. It was cold. "Maybe the neighbors forgot to mention," he said, then turned and walked away. That night, I stayed up until my mom came home. When she finally walked in, I told her everything, the knocks, the man, the feeling that someone was watching us. She didn't laugh it off or tell me I was imagining things. Instead, she hugged me tight and said, "We're going to be careful from now on." We started locking the door at all times, even when we were inside, and I made sure to keep the lights on. Weeks passed without another visit, and we started to relax. Then, one evening, my mom found a folded piece of paper slipped under the door. It was blank except for one sentence scrawled in pencil. "We know you're alone." We reported it to the police, but they never figured out who left it. The building had no cable work, no visitors, and the man was never seen again. It took a long time before we stopped thinking about those incidents. But even after all these years, I still remember that look and that smile. I could never forget it. I lived in a quiet neighborhood in Birmingham, Alabama, with my wife and our 2 kids. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other by name, and you felt safe leaving your doors unlocked during the day. I worked as a machinist, a steady job that kept me busy from early morning until late afternoon. Life wasn't fancy, but it was comfortable, just the way I liked it. Our house was a modest brick ranch, nothing special but enough for us. We had a big oak tree in the front yard that shaded the driveway where I parked my old pickup. Every morning, I'd load up my work tools and head out, usually saying goodbye to my wife from the porch before the kids got on the school bus. Nothing ever seemed out of the ordinary around there. It was 1993, so my daily routine included checking the evening news on our bulky TV and listening to classic rock on the radio after work. One Saturday morning, as I was getting ready to leave for work, I noticed something strange on my truck's windshield. There were 3 Polaroid pictures taped across the glass, all taken from different angles of our house. I didn't recognize who had left them. The pictures were close up, like whoever took them had been standing just outside the front door or maybe the driveway. It felt invasive, and I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that came with it. I took the Polaroids inside and showed them to my wife. She was just as unsettled as I was, but tried to brush it off, thinking maybe it was some kid playing a prank. Still, the fact that someone had been close enough to take those pictures without us noticing bothered me. We didn't have any enemies, and nobody around had given us a reason to worry about stalkers or anything like that. That afternoon, I checked around the yard and driveway for any signs of footprints or something left behind, but there was nothing. No disturbed grass, no broken branches, just the usual wear from living there. I also asked a couple of neighbors if they'd seen anything unusual, but no one had. It was like whoever had taken those photos had just vanished into thin air. Over the next few days, I started noticing little things that didn't add up. Our porch light, which I was sure I'd turned off at night, was on when I got home. And once, I caught a glimpse of a shadow moving past the curtains in the living room. But when I called out, nobody answered. I kept telling myself I was just being paranoid, but the Polaroids on the windshield had cracked open this sense that something wasn't right. One evening, a few days later, I got home late from work. It was around 9 p.m. and the street was quiet except for the hum of distant cars. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed something taped to the porch. This time it was a single photo, just the front door of our house, taken from a different angle. I didn't touch it right away. My heart was pounding, and I felt like I was being watched. I grabbed the phone inside and called the police. They came out and took a report, but said there wasn't much they could do without a suspect or clear evidence. They suggested I keep a record of anything unusual and stay vigilant. That night, I sat up watching the front window, flashlight in hand, waiting for any sign of movement. Hours passed. Nothing happened, and I was about to relax when I heard footsteps on the porch. I froze. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. My hand trembled as I reached for the knob, but before I could open it, a car sped off down the street. I looked outside. No one was there. From that night on, I changed the locks and installed extra security lights. The Polaroids stopped appearing, but the feeling of being watched never went away. I still don't know who left those pictures or why, but I learned one thing for sure. Sometimes the scariest threats come from people you never see.